Thank you for tuning in to the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like the material. Yesterday, Andrew Gold from the YouTube channel On the Edge with Andrew Gold did a very nice job interviewing Lloyd Evans in regards to all the things that have occurred recently. So today we're going to take a look at the video and share a few thoughts. So let's have at it.
No one explains that to you, that if when your audience grows to a certain size, people will look for things to pin on you and try to destroy you.
Lloyd Evans, many people will know who you are. You are like the guy of Jehovah's Witnesses. You're like the guy online of leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, I should say. That's a huge, very...
Yeah, I don't represent them. I'm not like the leader of the religion or anything.
Oh my God, that reminds me of when I said to Richard Dawkins that he was known for writing about religion. And he went, no, I'm known for writing about science.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yes, Lloyd Evans of the XJWs, which is the Jehovah's Witnesses. Why don't you tell viewers who don't know and listeners who don't know a little bit about you and what you've been doing on YouTube and how you've built up an audience, and then what's happened over the last few months. I'll let you sort of take it away.
Gosh. Yeah, well, I grew up. Well, I've been interviewed by you before, so that's that. If viewers kind of want more of a backstory, you very kindly interviewed me about that. And yes, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and when I was 30, around about 30, I moved to Croatia, and it was moving to Croatia because I met a Croatian woman, my wife Diana. It was moving to Croatia that basically led to me waking up to the fact that I was in a cult, because I was attending the local Jehovah's Witness meetings here in Croatia and realized that, I didn't understand any of it. So I was sat in the Kingdom Hall, hearing these talks in this other language, and it just gave me the space to think, hang on a minute, do I believe this? And to cut a long story short, I ended up snapping out of my indoctrination and realizing that not only had I been lied to for most of my life, but also this is actually quite an abusive group, with a terrible track record in the cover-up of child sexual abuse and, lives ruined over shunning and people persuaded to die rather than accepting blood. And so I started doing activism. I wrote a book called The Reluctant Apostate. I started a website called jwsurvey.org, now jwwatch.org. And in 2012, I started uploading YouTube videos. And as of the last few months, my channel has grown to over 100,000 subscribers. So there's been enormous interest in the subject that I'm talking about, and it has led to me growing a large audience. But what I've learned, especially over the last few weeks, is that when you grow a large audience, you also become incredibly vulnerable. And it's not something that when you start out on YouTube, there's no kind of small print where it's like, by the way, if you get big, this might happen.
What do you think it was about you in particular? Because there were quite a few ex-JWs. What do you think it was about you in particular that led to your channel growth?
Well, there were other ex-Jehovah's Witness channels when I started, and there are many, many now. I don't want to... I hate kind of being accused of talking myself up. I suppose that my experience within the organization as an elder and as someone who, for example, I went to a special school called the Ministerial Training School. It's like a 2-month course where they drill you on the various teachings and what have you. I guess I was well informed, and my experience within the organization and seeing various facets of the organization probably helped me to pick apart the teachings and the propaganda effectively, or more effectively than what people might expect. I don't know. I hate to kind of talk myself up in that way, but for whatever reason, the videos resonated. And what's also happened as well is that from 2014 onwards, the organization has become more geared towards producing video propaganda, so that there's now just this constant barrage of very coercive material coming out of Jehovah's Witnesses, which, of course, when you're a YouTuber and a YouTube commentator, gives you no shortage of material to be talking about. So I am not spoilt for choice when it comes to, thinking of topics to discuss, because I've got more material coming at me, or Jehovah's Witnesses, I should say, have more material coming at them than I can possibly even begin to stay on top of.
And so it grew to a huge channel, and you became, synonymous with Jehovah's Witnesses. That's your thing, and most people, maybe not in the audio podcast world, but in the YouTube world, certainly people know who Lloyd Evans is. And then things have started to take a bit of things have been up and down over the last few months regarding your mental health, and all sorts of different things coming out on Twitter. Allegations are being made, legal proceedings are being talked about. What happened? I want to go back to what I believe was a call, because we're going to talk about cyberbullying, and that's what I want to talk about today. But obviously, people need to know where this comes from. There was a call that you had, I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong about this. This is just what I've heard, with Kim and Bob, who are your producers. So take me back to that moment, and so I can hear your side of what went on.
I think you might be talking about. So this was way back in December, I think around about the 16th. I had a call with them because for quite a few days, I think a couple of weeks, my wife and I had been dealing with basically my infidelity to her. My wife had discovered that I'd been unfaithful. And so, that led to very difficult conversations, obviously, between me and my wife. And it's a very, very stressful time, in any kind of relationship. When there is infidelity or any kind of issues of that kind, where you're wondering whether you need to get divorced, there are children involved. It was an incredibly stressful time. And it just reached a point where, because I was working with various people, two individuals who I was working with most closely, Kim, Silvio, and producer Bob. Very important to call producer Bob because it's a synonym, and their anonymity needs to be preserved. I just felt it was important to bring them up to speed on what was happening behind the scenes. And I have to say that they were incredibly supportive. I was actually kind of surprised at how supportive they were. I was thinking, wow, I'm really, making myself vulnerable here and showing the very worst side of myself, albeit to people I work with closely who are my friends. But, they could potentially take this really badly and, say, I want nothing more to do with you. You've unveiled yourself to be an undesirable person to work with, so we're calling it quits. But they didn't do that. They instead, we set up a meltdown support group, is what we called it, because the truth is that I was in a very fragile state with my mental health. I didn't know what was going to happen in my life. And so they decided to basically support me and help me through it. And that's basically where everything, I guess, really started to go wrong, because while the problems in my marriage were a whole level of difficult and challenging to unravel, what's really provided the most stress, I would say, over the last few weeks is the fact that the things that I shared confidentially were ended up being blasted online, but not just the fact that my confidence got violated. It was the fact that a whole bunch of stuff was said about me and my private life and my work that just isn't true. And that, again, it's hard enough dealing with the reality of it, but to have to actually explain to people, no, actually this didn't happen, and no, that didn't happen, it's so difficult to navigate through that.
So we should set the record straight then. And I would say I think you are on the right podcast to talk about this, because I mean, for me, it's all about no moralizing, no thinking that I wouldn't have done the same as other people in their situations. I've had pedophiles on here, I've had psychopaths, murderers. So, and I find people often get most annoyed by things that are not the same as murder. The things that they can imagine that they might have done but didn't. I feel that that's what winds people up a lot. At the same time, we need to get to what happened, and obviously, allegations are, and I think you've admitted to this, that it wasn't just extramarital affairs. It was prostitution. Is that right?
So well, I didn't want to have any relationships outside of my marriage. So yes, it was. And just to be absolutely clear, it was prostitution leading up to, before the conversation took place in December. So, yeah, that it was with sex workers that I was unfaithful with my wife. Yeah.
And look, a lot of people are unfaithful with their wives, with sex workers, and I think the issue that a lot of the community have, of course, is that you've been a leading advocate against sort of sex trafficking and that kind of thing, and that you had sort of a moral duty, I suppose, as the leader and the face of the Jehovah's Witnesses, to take care in that aspect, especially because, of course, many sex workers in, I believe it was Croatia and Thailand, will have been sex trafficked.
Well, I'm not a leader. I'm a guy who talks about a religion. So, and I think this is where kind of words matter, because I've never ever, in fact, I think I even put out a video in the early days saying you shouldn't have leaders. I'm not a leader. I'm not a moral authority. I'm a guy who knows something about this particular religion, and I want to share my knowledge. So I've never presented myself as perfect. I've never presented myself as any kind of moral authority, and I've certainly never presented myself as a leader. Yes, you're right. I am an advocate against the cover-up of child sexual abuse. So if people want to draw lines between the cover-up of child sexual abuse, which is where children get abused, and the perpetrators aren't held accountable or get to evade justice, and sex workers, then they can do that if they like, but in my view there's a huge difference. And so what's happened is, and I hate to kind of sound like all woe is me, because I'm very mindful of the fact that we're having this conversation in the context of a country at the moment that's being blown to pieces and children being bombed and that kind of thing. I consider myself incredibly lucky in the context of everything that's going on at the moment, that my life's pretty damn good. But I think that it's very easy to slide from whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is crucial, into bullying, and I think that a conversation needs to be had about when does it stop being whistleblowing, and when does it actually start being bullying. So when are you no longer giving legitimate criticism of an individual? When are you instead bullying an individual by shaming him over his private life, even though he hasn't actually done anything wrong? You're just trying to draw lines and pin something on him that he's not responsible for. And I feel as though, again, that's the side of being a YouTuber, a creator, a public figure, call it what you will. No one explains that to you, that when your audience grows to a certain size, people will look for things to pin on you and try to destroy you. And particularly when it comes to YouTube, you get no protection at all. So people can now go on the YouTube search bar and type in Lloyd Evans, and a whole slew of videos are going to come up of people talking about my private life and saying a whole bunch of things that just are not true.
And they're trying to make a name for themselves, some of them as well.
Oh, it's really been incredibly stressful and challenging. Again, I try not to over dramatize things, because I think both of us are very, very fortunate.
Well, Lloyd, we are, but look, people kill themselves who are not at war. People can be very depressed with nothing wrong in their lives. So what you're going through does sound incredibly difficult. I've seen the barrages, and I've seen that. I think you make a really, really good point as well about the conflation of words, and the fact that and this is on this podcast a lot, we talk about this a lot, that we want to punish. We have this need to punish rather than, for example, reform, or so that's what whistleblowing is about. You whistleblow because you want maybe the act to stop, or you want the criminal act, or what if there is a criminal act, or you want that person to be reformed or put away or taken, not to be a danger to society anymore. But really, a lot of us like to punish. So when somebody sees someone like you, on the pedestal, and you do something that they see as morally not right, they want to knock you down, and they also will change words. And you're right, there's such a huge difference between child sexual abuse and having sex with sex workers. So conflating those terms makes things worse. And then there's a group mentality. I've seen that tribal reaction on Twitter and people having a go. So but one thing I would sort of maybe take issue with is that you're not a leader. And I say that fully aware of my own status as a podcast host. I just did a course for YouTube. It's some like £200 course or whatever, where you learn how to be a good YouTuber, and it's like a reputable one that helps people grow their YouTube subscribers. And it was like every day was a different lesson for 30 days. And it was like day 20, creation story. So what's your creation story? Day 21 was creed. You have to have a creed. Day 22, icons. The next day was rituals. The next day was sacred words. And the next day was non-believers. So this idea of you have to say that
you weren't getting into a cult, were you? It sounds like you were joining some kind of cult.
This is what I'm getting at. And the last page was leader, how to become a leader. And I've seen your channel, and you do a lot of these things. So do I. So does Sean Atwood, whose channel I go on. We all do them, whether consciously or not. And after years and years of doing them, you are a leader, especially if your channel is the vast majority of your subscribers have come from a very vulnerable position of being in a cult, and might have that intuition of looking for a leader in that sense. So whether you wanted to or not, I would say that you did become a leader, and maybe that gave you some sort of extra responsibility. I don't know. I
think to a degree I would agree with you. I think that it's like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. I think that when you have a platform, you do have added responsibility. And I think that there's been lots of conversation along those lines when you look at, for example, the Joe Rogan podcast and certain things that have been said on Joe Rogan's show that some would argue in the context of, for example, advice on COVID, are irresponsible. But then we're talking about, well, what has this person used his platform to say? What has this person used his profile and his authority to encourage people to do? And again, when I look at, even if you want to say, well, you have a large platform, therefore you have some kind of responsibility, I accept that. But judge me on my words, because I'm not going to be going on my YouTube channel telling people to drink horse dewormer, or telling people to, do things that are detrimental to their health or well-being. I accept my responsibility in that direction. I just don't think that being a public person means that I'm not entitled to a private life anymore, and that I deserve to have, personal things that have nothing, are no one's business but that of myself and my wife. Oh, well, therefore we need to talk about that because what he did in this department of his life is objectionable. I don't accept that, if that makes sense. So I am on board with you that people with large platforms have a responsibility. I just think that there's a limitation when it comes to what we can reasonably expect of a fallible human being when it comes to their private lives.
I think a lot of people would
I think he's correct with that point.
agree with you. And again, I want to constantly reiterate that I don't intend to judge, and I definitely don't think I wouldn't have done the same thing and all of that thing. But I am trying to look into why a lot of the community are so angry. And I suppose when you say judge me by my words, they might respond, judge me, well, I'll judge you by your actions. And of course there has to be a limit, as I get what you're saying about the private life, but also, I mean, what if you killed someone? What if you did? There has to be at some point where people go, hang on, and they think that you crossed that line. You don't think you did. You must have been aware with the sex workers that a lot of these would have been trafficked as children, and that is sort of goes against something that's very important to you, which is the protection of child sex trafficking and that kind of thing, right?
I've only ever had sex with consenting adults.
I don't mean to, I'm not intending otherwise.
I understand people's concerns about sex trafficking and that kind of thing, but ultimately the bottom line is, are we talking about sex between consenting adults, or are we not talking about sex between consenting adults?
Well, I suppose with prostitution, it's a blurry line with regards to consent and where that, we don't know. That's the truth of it. You couldn't know a Thai prostitute.
Well, I dated a sex worker in Thailand, but this is the thing that a lot has.
So this is a new development where he reveals that he dated a prostitute in Thailand.
Been said on YouTube where it's not based on anything I've said, and it's not even based on things that Kim Silvio have said. People have just raced to conclusions based on the fact that I went to Thailand.
Okay, you're referring to rumors that are just, I mean, that's hearsay, isn't it? And I didn't want to bring any of that, and we don't have to talk about that. I don't want you to think that I'm accusing anything like that. I'm not at all. I'm just trying to understand why other people might be, or your followers might be offended with regards to adult sex workers.
I feel like the majority of my followers, based on, for example, because I see the stats, I've seen the likes and dislikes on my videos, and I feel like the vast majority of my followers understand that I am a flawed individual. I never presented myself as perfect, and they understand that I'm entitled to a private life and that my privacy has been violated. I think what tends to happen, especially on Twitter, is that a minority who basically want to see someone burn are so vocal that they almost look like they might be the majority, but I don't think they are. I think that it's basically like a mob rule situation where, we've decided that this individual needs to be destroyed. And that's, again, where I think a line is crossed between, it stops being about whistleblowing, it stops being about accountability, and it starts being about bullying. Because I am happy to answer to any accusation regarding anything I may have done or may not have done. But I draw the line at people saying things about me that just aren't true. I mean, I've had, Andrew, all sorts of stuff said about child grooming, about wife beating. At one point, people were calling for social services to come and take me away from my children. This is clearly bullying. It's not about, we're providing a service to people, we're holding an individual accountable. It's, we've decided that this person should no longer exist as an activist.
Sounds like cancel culture.
I actually have fairly nuanced views about cancel culture. I think that I prefer the word consequence culture. I think that when you do wrong things, there should be consequences.
But you personally, and I'm not saying you are, but you don't think you did anything wrong. That's the issue.
I think I did do something wrong. I think that I was unfaithful to my wife, and I think that I had sex with consenting adults who were not my wife, and that's what I did wrong. But that's an issue between me and my wife, which, by the way, has been so much harder to navigate and so much harder to deal with all of the defamation and all of the bullying and all of the, basically the witch hunt that's been going on with Twitter has made it so much harder to navigate those deeply difficult and challenging personal issues that I'm having with my wife. So yes, I have made mistakes, but nowhere near on the level that people are trying to make out. And I just think it's wrong. I think bullying is wrong. I've never handled bullies very well. It's kind of the reason why I do my activism against Jehovah's Witnesses, because they, in my mind, are bullies, and I won't let them bully me. And I'm sure as hell not going to let a bunch of people who think that I should no longer exist as an activist, I'm not going to let them bully me either. It's just kind of in my DNA to push back against that sort of thing.
I gather that some of your followers are sort of a little torn, because of course there are the extreme people who are bullying, and then there are people who are very supportive, and then some are a bit torn and they're a bit upset. And some seem to have been saying that the problem for them is that you haven't taken any. You won't say you did aside from what you did, to your wife, which I agree with you. That's a private matter, and that is none of our business, quite frankly. But with regards to the prostitution and stuff, given your status, it's that you won't at all back down and say, I don't think it's as bad as some people say, but it is bad in some respects. I think some people were hoping there'd be some apology in that sense.
I think lots of people have been wanting apologies. I just absolutely maintain that I, again, hate to have to stress it again, but I have only ever in my 42 years had sex with consenting adults. And that's the end of the matter. And although I'm sure lots of people are disappointed to hear that I am a flawed individual and that I have been unfaithful to my wife, I'm sure that comes as a huge disappointment, especially in the context of a community that, has basically, in many cases, grown up in a culture of sexual repression where all of these things are incredibly taboo. I can understand why lots of people feel very disappointed, even to the point where they may feel like I owe them personally an apology. But I take apologies very seriously. It's actually, those who know me well know that I actually apologize quite readily. And I personally feel like if just about anyone can turn up and receive an apology from me, then it weakens, in my view, the currency of the apology to the one person I really do need to apologize to, which is my wife. So I'm adamant about the fact that, no matter how people have been trying to blow things completely out of proportion and talk about, sex trafficking and all sorts of things, no sex took place that wasn't between consenting adults. And the thing that I did wrong was that I was unfaithful to my wife, and it's my wife who deserves an apology. And again, I think the vast majority of my viewers understand that. I'm never going to be able to satisfy every last person on Twitter, especially when a good number of people on Twitter very clearly have their knives out for me and just want to see me. I almost feel like they just want to see me destitute on the street, or maybe even jumped off a bridge or whatever. They want to see me out of the picture altogether. They can jump up and down all they like about demanding an apology, but I can only apologize when I do something wrong, and the person who deserves an apology in my mind is my wife.
It's a tough one. It's that conflation of like people trying to suggest you did something that you didn't, and as you say, it was only adults. It's just that issue of consent and the history of, you know, with prostitution in Thailand, and I don't know too much about Croatia. You can never know. And again, I don't intend to moralize.
Well, the only thing I've ever said about sex workers was regarding before going to Thailand. This is again, and if you think about it, there's a sort of, I don't want to say kind of racism about it, but you know, to suggest that this is all that can be said about Thailand. This is the last word on Thailand, and that's not to minimize that there aren't huge problems with sex trafficking in Thailand, but to suggest that when you go to Thailand, oh, well, it must be because of this, you know, it must be because of sex trafficking. Well, what you're doing then is you're, in a way, being incredibly condescending about an entire country. You know, I went to Thailand because I wanted to go to Asia for the first time and experience somewhere completely new and, to my mind, exotic. I wanted to go scuba diving. I wanted to experience the food, the culture, everything. It had absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with sex workers.
Oh, once you were there, you then, that the sex workers happened.
But this is what I'm saying. People have literally taken, oh, he went to Thailand and run away with this narrative.
Okay, so that didn't happen.
I've never spoken about it.
It was in Croatia.
It was in other countries, in Croatia and other countries, before I went to Thailand, that I was unfaithful. Actually, when I went to Thailand, my wife and I were separated. So, but this is exactly what I mean. People just kind of run away with these narratives, and they forget that there's a real person at the bottom of all of this, a real person with a real private life and real children and real mental health problems. I don't mind telling you, I've had to start taking antidepressants in just the last few weeks because it's been so overwhelming. And it feels like, as of now, things are starting to get a little bit more manageable, and common sense is slowly starting to kick in, and people are, I feel at least, starting to think, hang on, this is a normal guy who's allowed to screw up from time to time, and he doesn't deserve to be bullied like this. That's at least the perception I'm getting. And it's getting slowly more manageable to deal with it all. But you're right in what you said earlier, that, you know, we're talking about mental health here, and no one prepares you for any of this when you first start making YouTube videos. Oh, by the way, one day when people type in your name in the YouTube search bar, all of these videos are going to come up linking you with child grooming, sex trafficking, blah blah blah. It really does a number on you.
I would say at this point, like anyone listening or watching who's got the daggers out and the knives out right now, I would say, I feel that way about things a lot as well. We all do. We want to punish and things. We go, that person has done something bad, let's kick them out of our tribe. And I would just say, let's try and be aware of that feeling inside us and go, okay, where does that come from? What place does that come from? And there is a human being at the end of it. And I'd always say, remember the human, I'm sounding quite culty now.
Well, just be kind, and again, we need to be able to hold people accountable. When people abuse their position and abuse their platform, and particularly when we're talking about cults that cover up crime and drive people to suicide through shunning and that kind of thing, these individuals and these organizations, we need to be holding them accountable. But that culture of accountability is never an excuse for bullying. It's never an excuse for just rounding on an individual and shaming them over their private life. Because you mentioned before about legal action. I've actually instructed lawyers against a small number of creators who are making these videos. I very strongly feel, and it wasn't something I I undertook lightly. I just feel like, thinking about future activists and people who kind of follow in my footsteps and do the work after I'm gone, you just cannot have a culture where anyone can say anything about anybody, no matter how defamatory and untrue and brutally horrible, and just have no consequences whatsoever. And this just, oh hey, it's just entertainment, it's just for YouTube. I think, well, first of all, I think YouTube should be doing more so that people like me don't need to bring in the lawyers. But if YouTube's not going to do anything, what choice do I have? Because we're talking about 10 years worth of work, really, really hard work that's in many cases come at the expense of spending time with my kids. I can't just let all of that burn because one or two people want to be able to put sensational stuff on their YouTube channel about me. I feel like I need to do something about it. And it all goes back to what I was saying earlier. I just don't handle bullies very well.
I should say as well, you've always been very, very nice to me. When I was just starting out, you were my first ever patron. And you still are. I don't know if you even remember, you're still a patron of mine. So I really respect and appreciate that and the help that you've given. And I imagine it can't just be me. You would probably help a lot of people. With regards to what's going on, I'm also torn about just from a tactical way, what you should have done or what you should do, because there's an argument that, you could apologize and you could sort of go, hey, look, I have upset some people because it's obviously, you are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and we talk a lot about abuse and things, and you might think that the prostitute stuff, the sex worker stuff, and I'm sorry for that and whatever. And then another part of me thinks, well, there's been a lot of articles I've read about, politicians shouldn't apologize. It doesn't actually help. It just shows people you were wrong and allows them to just go harder on you. And so I guess you're caught between. Let me ask you, what I'm wondering is, when you called your producers, Kim and Bob, why did you tell them? And I asked that from a place of curiosity because obviously I'm writing this book at the moment about the psychology of secrets and why people are compelled to reveal things. And you could have said, I need to take a short break, I'm having some issues with my marriage. Why did you tell them about the prostitutes?
I ask myself that constantly. Why did I confide in these individuals on such a private basis? Well, I obviously regret doing it. I misjudged. I felt that I could trust these two people who I'd been working with for months, working with quite closely. And I felt like if I was going to be taking a long period away from my activism work to sort my head out, I couldn't just kind of quit cold turkey and not let anyone who was working closely with me have a clue what was going on or what the reasons were. So I know in my mind, I know what was going through my mind when I had that conversation. And again, they were incredibly supportive at the time, and even kind of arguing over whose house I should come and stay at. But yeah, I feel like if one of the biggest issues that I now have in the wake of all of this kind of controversy is that my trust in not just my fellow human beings, but specifically ex-Jehovah's Witnesses has been completely annihilated, to the point where I'm really, really going to struggle now to collaborate with other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses due to this, which is a real shame, because I actually think that people from cult backgrounds kind of coming together and collaborating and working together can achieve an awful lot and achieve some really beautiful things. And it saddens me that I no longer have an appetite to do that, with other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses anywhere near like I used to. But it's just inevitable. When you have your confidence violated in the way that I did, it makes it very, very difficult to trust people again.
I suppose there's a mixture of people, and there'll be those who just have the daggers out because they're jealous of you. They might want to replace you. They might just be tired of seeing the same guy. You know, I remember with celebrities, for example, David Beckham or whoever, once they get that big, we want to knock them back down. And then there are other people maybe who just have different morals to you, and neither is right or wrong. You just see the world differently. And there'll be, maybe the case was with your producers, that they at the time didn't really take it in, and over the next few weeks it started to sort of contradict their morals, and they thought, I can't keep this quiet, and people are, you know, giving their patron money to you and supporting you in the same way they do to me. And maybe they thought they had a duty to get it out there. They think in a different way.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Patreon money, because that's actually something I wanted to talk about. But yeah, everyone should be entitled to change their minds. Definitely, I agree with that. So just because I agree with what Andrew's doing 1 week doesn't mean that, you know, a couple of weeks later I don't actually, you know, think, hang on, actually what Andrew's doing is really, really shitty. I suppose if I did change my mind, though, I'd be upfront about it and you'd know about it straight away. And I think if people were to kind of see, you know, the things that were being said to me and how supportive they were, like, for example, over WhatsApp and what have you, right up to the point where we had a disagreement and then things started to deteriorate, I think they'd be pretty shocked, because the narrative that Kim has been sharing is that almost immediately upon me confronting her with my infidelity, a pact was made so that they would both quit, but they would first see me through my crisis. Well, that's nowhere in evidence, in my view, when you look at the things that were said to me in the WhatsApp exchanges and how supportive they were. There was no clue whatsoever that they had any kind of moral issues or anything of that nature. But as regards Patreon, and this is a good example, I think, of how, again, you know, facts can just fly out of the window and people can just spiral off it with saying things that just aren't true. So one big narrative is, oh, he's used his Patreon money on sex workers. You know, he's used his Patreon money on Thailand. And one thing that I regret about my live stream, which I did kind of in a very reactionary state of mind, and not a good state of mind to be addressing such important accusations. You know, one of the things I said was, you know, do doctors who receive money for helping people, do they have to account for every last thing they spend their money on? And I still feel that way. I feel like it's either your job or it isn't. And, you know, nobody should be chasing after you and asking for your receipts for how you spend your personal funds. But when it comes to Patreon money, I've always taken my patron pledges incredibly seriously, and always reminded patrons that their funds are being churned back into the channel, so that, for example, I am upgrading my equipment, hiring a video editor, expanding the studio. That's where the patron funds go. For 2021, I think there were only 2 months in 2021 where the Patreon money was more than the Google ad revenue. So in other words, the Google ad revenue in 2021 was the most substantial money coming through for my activism work. So nobody can say, when it comes to me spending my money, my personal funds on a given thing, oh, he's spent his Patreon money on this. No one can say that, because actually it's not just Patreon money, it's the Google ad revenue. I also have 2 books, so I receive royalties from that, etc., etc. It's quite simply a lie to say, oh, Lloyd spent his Patreon money on this. But the lies do a lot of damage, and I've lost well over 200 patrons since all of this.
Each one would have been paying what, £3?
Well, let me just say this. You know how long it takes to grow Patreon. So, 200 patrons, we're talking about being knocked back over 12 months in terms of growing Patreon. And the last time I calculated it, I haven't done the latest numbers, but the last time I calculated it, it accounted for more than Tibor's wages, more than my video editor's wages in lost pledges. And I can tell you that, because when you do Patreon, you get the exit surveys through, don't you? And so people get to say, oh, I've stopped pledging because of this. And so many people were saying, oh, I'm not happy with you using my Patreon pledges for sex workers, or I'm not. And so they bought into this, but by the time they've stopped pledging, the damage has been done. And I'm, it's very difficult to say, actually, you're wrong about this. Do you mind pledging again? So
you'd end up in an argument with every one of them. It does complicate. Look, when you make a living, as we both do, and many of us do, from people choosing to give money to us, even though it is for our work, it does complicate things. It muddies the waters. You're absolutely right. It's like, well, which bit of the money in the bank came from Patreon and which from my other projects? Had I not received anything from Patreon, I might still have gone on and done all of those projects. But at the same time, they're thinking, I don't want to give money towards a person whose morals don't fit with mine. And you could call that perhaps what you call maybe consequence culture. And it's something, it's not nice because you don't feel you did, with your morals, you don't think you did anything wrong. But they do. And some of them are believing things that aren't true.
Well, I did, again, let me just stress, I did do something wrong. That I'm not saying I didn't do anything wrong. I did do something wrong. But it was against my wife. And if anybody started pledging Patreon pledges under the assumption that I don't make any mistakes in my personal life and I am a perfect person, then I think if they'd have asked me to begin with, I would have said, actually, we're probably best not pledging if it's on that basis. But fortunately, the majority of my patrons seem to be sticking around. In fact, one or two have actually joined because of what's happening. I think most people can kind of grasp that just because I'm a flawed individual and have made mistakes in my personal life doesn't negate my criticisms of an abusive cult that's tearing apart families and covering up child abuse. I'm not precluded from commenting on any of those things, and to suggest otherwise, again, we're entering bullying territory. We're talking about a group of people that just want to see someone burn, and I think that's a really toxic attitude to be cultivating.
I would just say though that when these people are saying, they're upset about what you did, and you're saying, yes, I did something wrong to my wife, it was infidelity, and fine. I think we know that what they're saying is, no, it's not that, it's the sex workers. Now, you and I might not think there's morally an issue with sex workers, but they do. So I think that's their issue, isn't it? That's what they want, some sort of apology.
I haven't said there isn't an issue with sex workers. I think that there is definitely a conversation to be had with that. I just don't accept the premise that when you have sex with sex workers, you're no longer allowed to talk about the cover-up of child sexual abuse. I struggle with that line of reasoning.
Well, let's say, imagine there's like somebody is the head of a charity against prostitution and sex trafficking and stuff. If somebody else is caught having affairs with prostitutes, it's not really a big deal. If that person is, it becomes a big deal. So that's where they're, and again, I'm not saying that you're, but that's where they're coming from, I think.
Yeah, well, again, if people want to draw parallels between an organization that keeps a database on individuals who sexually abuse children and someone who has visited sex workers, then they're free to do that. But I think most people can see the difference. One are people who In one situation, we're talking about sex between consenting adults where money changes hands, and in the other case, we're talking about children being raped. And for me, the difference is night and day.
So tell me, how is your mental state right now? I mean, even Kim, your producer, you're having this big fight at the moment. She has said that she thinks she doesn't agree with how a lot of the community have reacted to you. She thinks it's over the top. She's not comfortable with it at all. It is, like, for anyone listening, it is mad, some of the horrible things that are being said, some of the bullying and pushing and punishing. Take us inside that mind right now of yours.
Well, it's interesting that she's saying that now. I think it's a little bit late to be saying that after she's put things in motion. And I won't talk too much about that individual because I'm literally litigating against her. But I think that anyone who has been an ex-Jehovah's Witness and knows anything about the ex-Jehovah's Witness community knows that, we're a community of people carrying immense emotional baggage, immense hang-ups and taboos surrounding sex, and no shortage of judgmentalism. And when you start hurling accusations at someone, it's always going to snowball. It's always going to be difficult to keep restraint and stop things from spiraling out of control. If all I'd had to deal with throughout all of this controversy was just the stuff that really did happen, just the factual stuff, that would have been invasive enough. What Kim Silvio did was so invasive, Andrew. I said at the time, I can't imagine feeling that much different if someone came into my home and burgled me at gunpoint or rifled through my possessions in front of me. It's such an invasive thing to have your personal life dragged into the spotlight for on whatever pretext. In the case of Kim Silvio, in the pretext of, oh, this person needs to be outed, this person needs to be exposed. But then to have to deal with all of the other stuff, all of the stuff that's untrue, like I mentioned about Patreon funding and, sex trafficking and all of those sorts of things. It's hard enough dealing with the true stuff, but layer on all of the defamation and all of the insinuation and all of the lies. It really has pushed me over the brink. And I think the only thing at this point that's leading me to kind of continue is just that I hate to see bullies win. And I have, still so much support from my patrons, and it's clear from my viewers and the comments that are coming through on the channel that people believe in what I'm doing and want to see more of it. But I've actually spoken to other creators who've been through similar to what I'm going through. And it's left them shell shocked. And they're like, I spoke to one who's literally training to become a carpenter because that person wants to walk away at some point in the future completely from creating content on YouTube because there's no protection. Once the mob decides that you need to be destroyed, you just get torn to pieces, and there's no recourse. There's no kind of independent arbiter on YouTube who you can go to and say, these dozens of videos that are accusing me of child grooming. Do you mind taking those down? There's no way of doing that. And the internet doesn't forget. The internet remembers. And I've got 2 kids. One's just had her 3rd birthday. The other is 7. At some point in the future, they're going to have to deal with all of this stuff that's floating around online. And all I can do right now is do what I'm doing, which is hire my lawyers and hope that at some point in the next few years, the people who are doing this are held accountable so that I can point to them and say, look, they did this, I responded, and here's the outcome. But it's a really, really difficult thing to go through. And it all, again, just boils down to just a lack of kindness and a lack of basic human empathy and compassion. It's a real shame.
Has it changed at all? Because we've spoken a tiny bit before about how you've often had views that are a little bit more on the progressive, dare I say, woke side. Just nothing extreme either way. Has it changed a little bit how you feel about cancel culture and consequence culture, especially with regards to the bullying? Or, has it given you a new insight?
I like to think I've always had a nuanced view. I'm against orthodoxy, so I'm against like a mob, of unknown, unaccountable individuals kind of just floating around on Twitter, just deciding amongst themselves that there's this kind of dogma that people need to stick to, and destroying people who don't sign up to that. I am very much about principles and very much about social justice and very much about equality. And if that makes me woke, fair enough. But I like to think that my position is nuanced when it comes to cancel culture. So I think that, like with anything, almost anything can be weaponized. Almost anything can be taken to an extreme. And woke culture can be taken to an extreme and can be weaponized and can be perverted. But for me personally, the general incentive behind woke culture and behind cancel culture, I think that for the majority, the incentive is to create a kind of more tolerant and understanding world. It's just a shame that one or two individuals ruin things by inevitably taking things to extremes. So I guess that's all I'd say on that.
How are you going to be, Lloyd? How are you? What's going to happen now?
It's just a case of taking each day as it comes. I'm definitely in a better place now than I was, I would say, 2 or 3 weeks ago. The antidepressants are helping. I'm told that it takes a month for you to start to feel effects, but I like to think that in terms of no longer feeling just the overwhelming despair, I like to think that I've turned a corner already, or at least I hope so. There's still no shortage of stuff to talk about in terms of Jehovah's Witnesses. As of now, despite all of this sustained attack on Patreon and what have you, we can still operate our business. We can still pay Tibor. So it's just about carrying on as best we can. Again, it's the biggest challenge, I think, has been trying to sort through my own mental health and specifically my personal issues in my family with all of this noise going on in the background. And that's very much ongoing, and I think has probably been stunted due to everything that's been happening. It's definitely made it harder going and slower to deal with, in my opinion, that more important part, side of my life. And so I guess it's a bit too early to say where the chips have fallen in that department. But I think broadly speaking, I feel like I hope I've hit rock bottom. It's one of those things where when you're going through it, you think, oh, now I've hit rock bottom, and then you fall again, and oh, okay, oh no, I'm falling again. And I hope, touch wood, that I've hit rock bottom and it's upwards from here.
I hope so too. And if you need any example of somebody who can overcome that stuff, look no further than Sean Atwood, who I do his show on Wednesdays. He just lives with it. Because I was thinking as well, like, I would say something, tedious, like, well, time's a healer, Lloyd, it'll be all right. But time's not really a healer on YouTube, because in 10 years people will still be writing comments, will still be having a go, some people just because they feel like it. And Sean still gets those because he's got 700,000 subscribers or whatever, so he's always got people doing it, and you just go, oh, there's a troll, get him out, there you go, and he just smiles and gets on with it. So hopefully at some point you'll be able to feel that way about it. Maybe, is that the best case scenario?
Best case scenario for me is that, I'll make a few more videos. I've still got things to say, but I kind of dream of one day just being in glorious isolation. You know, like you know, like in the new Star Wars trilogy where Luke's on this island. That's just my dream of just being on an island somewhere and just being in glorious isolation and maybe just writing books, because I'm a writer. You know, I've written 2 books, and I'd love to just be a writer and maybe have a boat and go fishing at weekends, and that's that, and being with my family, you know, having time for my family. That's basically my dream, and it's good to have something to work towards, even if I'm not there yet.
How are your family all right?
Yeah. It's been incredibly challenging for all of us, and when I say all of us, I mean including, you know, the children, because it's impossible to shield children completely. You do your best as a parent when there's a crisis going on, but it's impossible to completely shield your children when things are really, really bad. And I'm sure Jessica will have memories from this period where in the future, when she's older, she's like, yeah, I remember that, you know. It's very, very painful. But again, in the context of the wider world and what's happening at the moment, we could be in a far, far worse situation. And it's one of those things where you see children's hospitals being bombed. It puts things in perspective. You know, we did a drive to the border with Ukraine-Hungary border to pick up some refugees, and that sort of thing, again, it just puts things in perspective. You know, we have a roof over our heads. We're not in any kind of existential fear of bombs landing, you know, in our front room. And I think it's good to be grateful for what you have, you know.
I like that. And again, I know I already said this, but I mean, there will be people who are out to get you who are watching this, I imagine, or listening to this. And I would just say, again, think about, if you're going to write something on Twitter, if you're going to be angry, and you know, think about where that urge comes from and what it will achieve for anyone, for yourself, and for Lloyd, and you know, the where and the why, and remember the human. So yes, and I hope you know, get back to doing what you do best, Lloyd, and all the XJW stuff. You're a leading light among YouTubers, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
This was a really nice interview. I enjoyed it thoroughly. In conclusion, I have this question. What standard would you hold an atheist to? Please tell me what you think in the comment section below. Thank you for tuning in to the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like the material.